Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning to have a look at Evolution MX. A little bit of housekeeping just before we start. We will be recording the session, so that will be available to you as a link after the webinar has completed. That'll be sent through from our marketing department. Any questions that you have during the session, you can log into the Q&A panel, I think towards the bottom of the screen in your case, and we'll endeavour to get back to you after the event with answers to any queries that you've posed to us. Evolution MX is brought to you by Integrity Software. It is construction industry focused, which means we can concentrate on the specific requirements of the construction industry in terms of contract costing and accounting. It is fully integrated. Represented down the left-hand side of the menu are all of the modules that are potentially available within Evolution MX. Those with the orange solid icon are what we refer to as the core system, and those are provided to all users for the starting point of their system. There are then optional modules that can be added either during implementation or subsequently during the lifetime of the use of the product. It is scalable in terms of licensing, so only those modules that are covered by your license will be shown on the menu. You can also require or request a relevant number of company licenses and also user licenses, and users can be set with restrictions so that you'll only get into the areas that are relevant to them. Each of the modules displayed there is available for use within the system. I'll just briefly explain some of them. The contract ledger is really what the focus is for our system. It's the job costing. It's where your contracts are defined and set up, where you can record budgetary information. We can import budget information from Excel, whether that has been derived as a bill of quantities in Excel itself, or whether it's been an export from one of the leading estimating systems, such as Causeway or Conquest or BuildSoft, to name but a few. The contract ledger, therefore, will collect all the cost information that's been posted within the system, usually from elsewhere in the system, through the purchase ledger, through the job, through subcontractors, and through the payroll, as well as the revenue in form of invoices and/or applications valuations, so that easily and overall you'll be able to see on a contract how much it's cost you, how much it should have cost you, and how much you've earned in terms of revenue and ultimately profitability, retention, and so forth. The purchase ledger then is for your traditional accounts payable. That's for your supplier invoices, possibly matched to earlier raised purchase orders, but not necessarily. We're not saying that's a mandatory requirement on the system. There is an option within there nowadays for the inclusion of, what I mean by invoice register is an easy way of being able to deal with invoices that arrive within your organization via email without the need for anybody having to print them. They can then be seen on screen, and either you can take the opportunity to post that in the areas that it needs to go to, or you could exercise, in addition to that, the OCR option, which means the system can do the clever bit of reading the information from the invoice and giving you suggested postings to make without you having to input too much information. Separate from that, and deliberately so, we'll find the subcontractors. That'll cater for all the requirements under the CIS scheme in the UK and also the RCT scheme for the Republic of Ireland. As a dedicated ledger, we're able to address these specifics in terms of things like the verification process with HMRC without the need to go to the website, for example, and also the online filing in terms of the monthly return. Similarly, for RCT purposes, we would have the contract notification process, connecting to ROS, and also the preparation and advice to ROS of the payment of invoices and certificates. Subcontractors' ledger itself can also do things like track public liability insurance details and give you timely reminders as to when you maybe need to take action with your subcontractors. And subcontractor engagement can be on any basis. It could be straightforward invoicing, in which case there's an invoice register option as well, or it could follow an application process where perhaps there's a valuation by your internal QSs to arrive at a payment certificate that's going to be raised and sent off to the subcontractor. Sales in the middle of those two is for your revenue recognition, and that is configurable to suit how you want the revenue to be recorded and on what type of contract. So we're not saying by any means that it's one rule fits all. It could just be straightforward invoicing, but equally that invoicing could involve retention or not, or maybe movement or cumulative values. Alongside that, or instead of, you could have the application process, where that could be configured as being a memorandum effect on your debtors, so that there's just a figure that shows for reporting purposes against the contract, against which you can make a more accurate valuation posting, which will affect your debtors. And then if you wanted to, you could raise an invoice, but no need to do that. So it's all very configurable through the setup of the sales processing. And we'd spend some time with you during implementation to make sure that you'd have the sufficient number of appropriate routes for doing your revenue recognition. The payroll is there as well. It's our own payroll. It will comply to all of the legislation for both the UK and Ireland. We can run that on a monthly, weekly basis. It can be costed as well, where it's required to be against your jobs, or it can be run as an overhead. So you have the option of involving the costing at payroll source if you want to. Nominal ledger and cash book then finish off on the core system. That's dealing with the financial side of things. The nominal ledger dealing with the journal entries that need to be made over and above what's happening elsewhere, as well as the all-important VAT reporting and return and communication with the relevant authorities. Trial balance and full profit and loss reporting can be achieved through the nominal ledger. Your cash book sits at the end of the core system and will allow you to deal with incidental payments and receipts not being dealt with elsewhere, as well as your bank reconciliation, whether that's a manual ticking off exercise or whether you want to download the statement from your bank and then upload it to imports and does a suggested automatic reconciliation for you. Other key optional modules to think about could be the likes of the document management module. Again, that's our own module, not third party. So that will documents are being created within your system, whether they be sales invoices, payment remittances, payment certificates, purchase orders, pay slips, anything in terms of a document that you produce in the system and probably email out to the recipient, although hard copy printing is available as well. The document management system will then take care of the automatic filing and storage of those documents. So they'll be available to retrieve against the transaction from wherever they are within the system and at whatever time going forward. So a payment certificate, for example, raised to a subcontractor would be available as a drill down on the transaction and a retrieval of the image against a subcontractor inquiry, but equally against the contract inquiry and even through to the nominal ledger. So from an audit perspective, you can get hold of all this documentary evidence. Document management will also deal with the storing of those incoming emails we talked about briefly earlier in terms of the invoicing for suppliers and subcontractors. Upon completion of the processing of an invoice, its image will be attached to the posting. Whether that came in as a PDF or a JPEG or a TIFF file, it'll be stored within the system against that transaction. But you can also use document management on a more of an ad hoc basis to be able to drag and drop documents of any electronic nature, whether they be an Excel file, a Word document, a PDF, a TIFF file, whatever it may be. You can drag and drop that against the contract so it's stored in one place in a logically labeled hierarchy of virtual folders, which I'll introduce you to in a moment. Purchase orders is then another key optional module that will deal with material orders, subcontractor orders, and potentially also plant hire orders. It is available to be included as part of your system, either on a desktop edition, as I'm showing you here. We also have mobile apps available for material order processing and GRN processing. Plant is available as well as a module that will deal with not only the hiring in of external plant, but could also allow you to manage your own plant records, either just as a whereabouts, so you can track things as to where they are, but also potentially to contract cost those elements on an internal basis. So you get a more accurate reflection as to how much a contract costs you based upon use of your own plant. Other modules are available. Other key areas maybe to think about: works orders for those customers who are involved in repairs, maintenance, facilities management. That again has a mobile option, so we can allow jobs to be scheduled and then be fed out to a mobile app where engineers can pick them up, record their progress, and mark the stages as they go through completion, and ultimately allow for billing of the job. Okay, now the system is available therefore as a menu-based system if you choose. That's not the only way of accessing the system. That's entirely up to you. So you also have the ability to include wherever you want various different dashboards that can either provide information about the system, but equally could be used to provide access as a shortcut through to other areas of the system. So the example I brought up for you here would be to do with the purchase ledger. These dashboards are all configurable. They're often seen as particularly a director's preferred means of access because they give a snapshot of the key areas that they're interested in. They may all be to do with the same ledger as I've got there, or they could be something which is more company-wide. So you could have something which is looking at a bit of sales, bit of subbies, bit of creditors. So you configure the dashboards to include whatever you want and provide the information in that summary form. If from there you want to go into more detail, you could click on one of these graphs here just to go down into more information about my top 10 outstanding creditors, where I could now see a summary per creditor, expand upon the entries sitting behind a particular account, where you can then see information on summary format and in terms of the individual posting. The paperclip is a means of being able to retrieve image behind that, which in this case would have been an invoice that came in through the invoice register emailing system and was processed and then costed against this supplier and this contract. Okay, don't forget the dashboards are configurable. We do have separate sessions on recorded webinars which will look at these sort of areas in more detail. So this is really just a brief introductory and understanding of what the capabilities would be. Let's have a look at a contract in a bit more detail. So using the menu system this time, if I go into inquiry and call up my contract inquiry function, I'll be able to browse through my contracts that are currently in place on the system. Once you're finished with the contract, you can mark it as inactive, so it no longer necessarily appears, but could be included on reports where required. This is a list of my current contracts. Left-hand side column is showing you the contract numbers that are being allocated to individual jobs. It's up to you what these numbers are, whether indeed they are numbers or whether they're letters, abbreviations of the type of work or the client, or whatever it may be. You've also got the option of involving the hierarchy of main job and sub job. So with that second example there, job 1002, its main job sits at the top of the tree, beneath which you have the individual sub jobs, each of which is a job in its own right and can contain its own costs, its own budgets, its own revenue. But the overall picture is reflected back at the top of the tree. So each of these individual sub jobs will feed back up to the top. So you can see overall what's happening on that main job. And that's useful for people involved in the likes of individual plots, blocks, units, floors, major variations as well could be catered for through the use of sub-jobs. Let's just call up an example job and get an idea as to the information that's stored and accessible against it. Here we've got the job information being shown. The left-hand side of the screen is all about cost and budget. The right-hand side is all about your sales and your revenue. The way the information is displayed and the contract, the cost headings that are being used would be your choice. So don't think you're forced to use the terminology or the number of headings that are being shown to you currently. You decide how many headings there are. The cost is then being shown against each heading, and then alongside that you've got the budget figure. So you can see that overall at the bottom 34,000 has been spent on this particular contract against a budget of 72.5. The variance or the difference reflecting the job is about halfway through in terms of spend at least. Now, if you want to look at more information about those costs, you can click to the cost tab, second in from the left at the top there, and then be able to drill into individual areas of interest. So beneath the materials heading, for example, you can get into individual cost heads. Now, it's up to you how many cost heads there are, and whether these are numbers, letters, and also how they feed through to your nominal ledger. So typically what we'd expect to see is that you'd have detailed analysis within the contract ledger. So all the various MA codes are available to you, but each of these will probably filter through to one or a few nominal codes. So there's no need to clutter the nominal ledger with as much analysis information as you may require on the contract side. If you now want to see more information about any of these headings, or indeed all costs on the job, just double click in a particular area. So I'm going to click on the job description towards the top there, and that's going to open up and show me all costs for all areas of the system, whether that's plant, materials, subcontractors, and so forth. Okay, that's going to allow you to configure this information to be displayed the way you want it to. So you can right click in the column headings and modify the view so you can choose which column appears and in which order. You can also take this information if you want to externally. So if you right click and copy to Excel, it'll do just that. It'll take a straightforward copy of the information out to Excel to be able to then be shared with people who are not users of Evolution MX or saved externally for work elsewhere. Also from the screen, you may choose to drill into a particular entry. So on a payment certificate to a subby I've got there, if I double click, it'll take me into the entry of that particular transaction. Clicking on the source button towards the bottom will then open up the individual posting, showing you the values that were associated with different areas of the posting. And then the document will open up an image of any document associated with that particular posting. In this particular example, it's going to be a payment certificate that you raised on the system and probably emailed out to the subcontractor, but they're stored within the system will be a copy of that. This is an example of the kind of documents that Evolution MX can produce. We're not saying it's set in stone. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. We can certainly add your company logo into the blank space towards the top left there, but equally you can change the terminology and the fine tuning of the individual document content. That payment certificate, as we've seen, is accessible through the contract inquiry here, but would equally be available through the subcontractor inquiry and through the nominal, as I mentioned earlier. Coming back to our main contract inquiry screen, having seen that we've got access to the actual costs, we could also look at potentially the committed costs or the future costs. Clicking on the total button there will give you a view of the committed costs or the values on outstanding purchase orders in relation to this contract. So we can now see, in place of the budget, that we've got £3,000 worth of subcontractor costs and about 2,700 worth of material costs in the form of outstanding purchase orders. Now, these have been raised on the system. They are classed as committed costs, so you get future visibility of those costs made against the purchase orders and or the invoice. Those committed costs will be moved over into the actual costs and to reflect the actual value of the invoices posted. If you want to see more detail on those orders, down towards the bottom, you've got the orders button. That's going to show you a summary listing of all the purchase orders that you've got on your system, including the ability to drill into and see more details about a particular purchase order in terms of the product lines and prices and quantities involved, and also using the document button at the bottom, you can get access to the purchase order, the image of the purchase order as it was produced on your system. Again, your company logo can be included on that. And that would have probably been emailed off to the supplier, along with terms and conditions and maybe other documents. So purchase orders, again, is a subject of separate webinars, which will be made freely available to you should you be more interested. Okay, also from the main screen here, we've got the ability to look at a cash position view. That's telling us now, alongside our actual costs of 34,000, you've paid out about 22,500. So you are liable or vulnerable and exposed in terms of costs that are unpaid on your system. And you could get a similar granular drill down on those to see exactly which transactions had been paid and which ones were still outstanding. Particularly valuable and important to be able to show that on a system, and one which we can easily achieve because we are a fully integrated system. We're not an account system that's linked on to a job costing with it as an add-on. It's all part of the same main system. Another way of looking at the cost information, and I'll just use a different contract to show this to you, could be, rather than on a cost head basis, so for this different contract, we're looking at the same idea as with the previous one. We're just looking at higher values. So 341,000 now has been achieved in terms of the cost head structure. If we click to operations, we'll see the same subtotal at the bottom, 341,000, but this time we can see the activities or the tasks or the phases of the jobs that was involving the different cost elements. So we've got a roof cost there of 18,500 versus somewhat of a hefty budget of 300,000. If we switch to our cost tab, we'll be able to see how that could be expanded to show more detail on that roof structure, for example. If I open that section, we'll now see that there are actually subtasks or operations involved with the roof. Drilling stage further, you start to now revert back to the traditional resources. You can now see that there's 11,000 costs worth of materials, but it's purely materials involved in the walls to gables section of the roof structure. So if you're wanting that kind of information, it is available to you. Obviously, there's more input required to indicate on each cost posting what the activity is in relation to, but that can be particularly valuable to give you that extra level of analysis for assistance in the likes of preparing valuations, for example. Back to our main job, we can look now at the right-hand side of the screen where we'll be able to see we've got the revenue summary. So over here, we've got a tailored view constructed by yourselves or in conjunction with ourselves, will help you get the required view of what you want the revenue to look like on this particular contract. And it will follow the processes that have been set up for use within this contract. So this contract involves applications. We've got a memorandum figure at the top there. So that's just an ability for you to record a contract sum, just to say, ultimately, we're going to bill 100 grand for this job. The other postings or the other sections will come from postings in the system. So we're recording the fact that in summary, we've had 1,500 quid's worth of applications, none of which have yet been certified. And it's only when you post a certificate entry or evaluation entry or perhaps an invoice that that figure will change to give you an actual cost on the contract. As I mentioned earlier, You can tell the system that you want that 1,500 to be reportable against the contract, but not to form part of your accounts, your turnover, or your debtors. So you can configure this with the wording, the terminology, and the maths required to refer relevantly to the type of sales processing that's happening on this contract. On other contracts, it might be a different view. So this next now is showing me a contract which is not involving applications or valuations. It's just got an order value at the top there, but it's got just purely invoicing, credits, and cash receipt. So you can have something as straightforward as that, as involved as the first example, neither of those, or multiple different versions in between. It is probably the most configurable part of the system as to how you want to account for your sales and revenue. Also within the contract, we've got access to the documents. So down towards the bottom, the document button on the bottom line will give access to all of the documents that are currently stored in relation to this particular project or job. Now, the way that information is shown is in the virtual folder structure that I briefly mentioned earlier. So logically storing your purchase orders will have been an automatic file of all the purchase orders for this job that were raised with inside Evolution MX, whether they be of a materials nature or maybe a different format reflects a subcontractor order. They're all going to go into the purchase orders folder. And that would go for other types of entry as well that have been processed within the system. Payment certificates will automatically be filed in that relevant area. Other sections could involve other types of postings as well. So invoices, for example, that have come through the invoice register, maybe have sticky notes attached over the top of them. The image would then be available to be retrieved through the invoices section. So these sections will be populated largely by work with inside Evolution MX, but you can also use your own sections as well. So within the photo section, that's not anything Evolution MX itself has had anything to do with, but within there you can see any relevant photographs to do with the site work, any damages, claims that may be relevant. Other sections could involve the likes of drawings, so anything you want to in terms of other sections, just drag and drop into here anything that's relevant to this contract and it'll automatically get tagged and filed against that contract. Now, this could also extend to all important site forms, maybe health and safety type activities, whether those be risk assessments, method statements. These could be forms that you complete through your normal process that you're currently following. The completed form could then just be dragged and dropped against the contract, whether that's to do with, say, risk assessment, hand-arm vibration logs, or whatever it may be. We do also have available to Evolution MX a forms module. Again, not the subject of today's session, but we're happy to furnish you with an overview of how that might work. It's designed to work with mobile devices so that people on site can be collecting information onto an agreed template for risk assessment, for example, taking pictures, signatures, collating the information, and then having that sent back to your host Evolution MX system, where it will automatically put it into the relevant folder structure here, perhaps following authorization controls if a health and safety representative, for example, needs to oversee all of the incidents and accidents that have been recorded from site. So that's an option to add on to, if you like, for the document management, or just use those documents, as I say, that you're creating and using yourself. Looking at individual contract information is all well and good, but you're probably going to want to see more of an overview of how the whole system is performing. So we can use the reporting options available to us inside Evolution MX. In a section called Analytics, we'll find reports that are basically under your control. So you can decide to either use those samples that are provided by us for you, or add to those your own choices, or adapt the ones that we've sent. So it's user-defined reporting by another name, really, analytics. Within there, we'll find the example for contract performance. If we call that up, we'll be able to see a summary of all of my jobs. These could be filtered, so you may be looking at only the active jobs or only those jobs that are due to complete in the next few months, or maybe jobs for a particular client or type of work. So we can use the various different toolbar buttons here to maybe filter the records to only select those that are required, to also select the columns that are required. So if I use the choose fields, we'll be able to see a list of those items that are so far included and therefore ticked in the panel towards the left-hand side. All other fields are available for inclusion on there and explained to you in fairly clear English. So there should be no ambiguity as to what field is representing what kind of information. You then pick and choose which fields are to be shown and in what order. If you want them in a different order, you just drag and drop the column headings around. You can involve also your own choice of conditional formatting. So the reason I've got some lines highlighted in green is I've done a conditional formatting rule, which has said if the profit margin is greater than 0, color the whole line green. So in other words, the green lines are the jobs that are making me money. Not great news that there's only 3 of them, but at least it's an early heads up that that's the case. You can set your own ruling on that, obviously. As I scroll down further, you're able to go into the information about jobs over budget, for example. So I've got a red line there is showing me that I've got a contract that's over budget. Further down, I've got an orange line that's saying you've got a contract that is at 90% of its budget. So you can use traffic light style reporting to highlight the rules and draw to attention more easily those instances that you want to make more obvious. From the report, which you could take out to Excel if you wanted to, you've got a tools and export as option to go out to Excel. But you could, from within inside the report, drill down on the information. So on the actual cost of 34 grand that we saw earlier on the contract inquiry for job 0737, if I click on that, it will drill me down into more information behind the scenes. And on there, you can see there's 10,500 nearly of materials. If I click on that, we'll drill down and be able to see information about the individual cost head totals, beneath which you can see the individual postings or entries that have been made. And behind there, we'll have a similar ability as we saw earlier to be able to retrieve images of the documents. So from one screen, you can drill down to the level of data that you want and get hold of the transactional information. That is available through browser-only access. So the analytics function and also the dashboards would be available to somebody who has got a limited license capability with inside Evolution MX, not expected or required to do any postings or updates, but they are accessing it on a self-serve basis. So that means as a browser, they can access it through anywhere on any browser, whether that's Firefox or the Edge or Chrome, whatever it may be. And also on any device. So it could be on a tablet device where they've not actually got Evolution MX itself installed as a functioning program, but you've got access to the data. Okay, just to introduce very quickly to, as I say, one of the newer features that's become available with inside Evolution MX would be the idea of the invoice register. So I've got a dashboard here which allows me to focus on the activities that are required through invoice register. The orange tile top left there is summarizing for me and telling me you've had 6 invoices that have come into a designated email address that need to be processed. Again, I'll just quickly introduce you to the idea of the invoice register. There is a separate webinar recording. We'll go into this in more detail. So if I access the list to do, I can see the information that is ready to be processed. I can see an image of the invoice on the right-hand side. I can click into it. And then the image is available for me on the left-hand side to then be able to allow me to put the processing information into the right-hand side. Now, this isn't using OCR that I mentioned earlier, although OCR is available as a top-up to Invoice Register. If that were present, then the right-hand side of the screen would be populated for you based upon what the OCR has found in terms of who the supplier is based on the VAT registration number and also key fields relating to invoice number and dates and so forth. Without OCR, though, it's still a time-saving benefit because you can just look at the image on the left-hand side without the need to print it or scan it. You've got the ability then to select the supplier by searching or just using a partial entry, confirming the date, due dates, reference number, maybe the supplier's invoice number, the total value including VAT, and then if they provided you with a purchase order, we can match to that. So it doesn't have to be matched to a purchase order, as I mentioned earlier. But if you are doing that, then the purchase order information would become available for a suggested match. If I then click on the show cost allocation, we'll see then the lines of the purchase order that are being found. And in this case, there is an exact match. So everything that was on the invoice matches what was on the order. I've therefore got nothing left to allocate. I'm ready to go and post that straight through. I am able to send it off for approval or querying if I need to. There's a place on query option, which could be sending an email off to somebody who's not necessarily an Evolution MX user, but waiting their answer to any queries or maybe their approval before it's posted. At any point, you've got the option of being able to add. Okay, and then you can choose to post it directly through to the ledger or maybe saying I'm going to post it through to the ledger, but I'm going to put it on hold. So depending on what your choices might be. Selecting submit at that point will do the tidying up, the matching against the purchase order, the updating of the supplier account, the updating of the actual costs on the contract, removing the earlier committed costs, and also updating your general ledger, the nominal ledger, removing it from your to-do list, but making it available to be looked at from wherever you choose to go, whether that be through the contract ledger or through other areas of the system. So within the analytics, I could fire up my contract I could look at a particular contract in some detail, be able to see now a dashboard purely relating to that particular contract that could include a drill down on all of the costs that I've got, opening up and showing any areas that you've got a particular interest in. Okay, which will include the cost postings that have just been put through, including any entries that have just been made, like I've just done. And that could then be expanded upon and seen in more detail. Showing you various ways around the system, admittedly as a very quick introduction. We would love to spend more time with you going through the system in more detail. Any particular requirements that you therefore want to cover would be looked at on a one-to-one basis. I do hope, though, however, you found this session of use and of interest. I'd like to thank you for attending and wish you a good day. Thanks very much.